Welcome to this Encounter South African International Documentary Film Festival Q&A. I am here today with filmmaker Maddy Bazil. My name is Julia Cain. I'm from the Center for Film and Media Studies at UCT, and I'm very pleased to be hosting the session today, as well as two other Q&A sessions with UCT filmmakers that have been accepted into this year's festival. I'm just sharing my screen. Today's film is called Grandpa Ernest Speaks, and it's a film by Maddy Bazil, who is a multidisciplinary artist and storyteller, interested in memory, intimacy, and the ways in which we navigate worlds, real and imagined. Her work holds space for collective and individual memory of trauma, both cultural and personal. Maddy is an MA Documentary Arts candidate at UCT. Grandpa Ernest Speaks is her first film. It was selected for the Liftoff First Time Filmmaker Sessions, and Encounters is its world premiere. All right, so back to you, Maddy. And very happy to be here with you today. And I thought we could get started with you giving us a short synopsis of your film and the genesis of Grandpa Ernest Speaks. What was your inspiration and why did you decide to make this film?
Cool, thanks, Julia. Yeah, so the story behind Grandpa Ernest Speaks is that, well, it's the story of my great-grandfather and his journey fleeing then Czechoslovakia as a Jewish refugee in the Holocaust and building a new life elsewhere. And equally, I think it's about my journey of making the film and a sort of self-reflexive take on that. And it's always been a story that has kind of been part of my family's narrative. The backbone of the film is this audio recording of my great-grandfather telling his life story, and that recording has been in my family for a really long time. Like I've had it saved to a hard drive since I was like 10, and everyone in my family has a copy as well, and it's always been just this thing that we have and don't really know quite what to do with. So it felt very natural for me to do my first film about this. It felt like the right thing to do, and it always kind of loomed large. And then at the same time, I was also kind of intellectually interested in the distance that I feel from the story, even though it has had this big presence kind of in my family, like lore. His experience as a refugee and experiencing persecution and all of this is so far removed from my lived experience. And so I found myself thinking quite a bit about the privilege that is for me to feel removed from it, and like how this can be such a big thing for my family, but also not really such a big thing personally for me, and how you can kind of hold those two things at the same time. And thinking about the idea of identity and how much of it is self-determined or predetermined. So making the film was sort of a way for me to, I guess, process all of these different things. And it's also kind of a way for my family and me to, in a kind of exciting way, archive all of this material that we've kind of collected and accumulated, and like no one's really kind of been the archivist. So that was kind of a bit of an impetus.
And you speak about it being your first film, and I know that you did this film as part of your first year of your Master of Documentary Arts program. Can you speak a little bit about this first experience with being a first-time filmmaker, and as I know, you did everything yourself, so it was quite a jump into the deep end.
Yeah, it was definitely a learning experience. It was really, I think it was really valuable to make this first film so independently, because I feel like on a technical level, I learned a lot about where my skills lie and where my interests lie. Like I realized that I could spend like hours and hours color grading something happily, like losing track of time, but make me mix audio and I will like probably tear my hair out. And that's probably a good thing to know about myself. So yeah, and it feels really satisfying to be able to say that I made the whole thing myself. Like every bit of it was me. But it also made me realize I'm a little type A about creative things, and so I think even though it seems counterintuitive, I actually benefit quite a lot from collaborating with people and not getting to indulge every creative impulse I have and having other people's input. So I feel like I gained a bit of an appreciation for that for future projects.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's clear already from what you've said that this is a personal documentary. And it's quite interesting that all three of the selected UCT documentaries were very much personal documentaries in their form, not prescribed, but that is just what emerged last year as a very sort of strong theme running through the productions that were made. I know that you've also developed quite a strong research interest in personal documentary. Can you speak about this with reference to your ideas about the form of personal documentary and also intergenerational memory and trauma?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it is funny that we all kind of made very personal, family-oriented films. I think in some ways I was definitely inspired by everyone else doing that last year. It kind of gave me I've always wanted to do this story, but it gave me kind of the push to be like, okay, I actually can tackle this. So that was cool. But yeah, I've gotten really interested in kind of the interplay between the personal and the like broader historical, political, and how they kind of cross-reference each other. So the idea that a personal documentary can be contextualized in this broader framework, and you can see more of a scope from it. And then conversely, how large-scale historical events or political events can be humanized via personal narrative. And so I went into this film kind of wanting to play a bit with time and space and like take a bit of a narrative approach towards looking at this historical trauma and kind of look at this saga across a lot of time and really like weave a story out of it. And I learned like way later that this actually really fits into post-traumatic cinema theory quite a bit. The idea of second phase post-traumatic cinema kind of fits it to a T, which I didn't really know at the time. But that was sort of the big interest, I guess, for me, and that continues to be a big research interest for sure.
Okay, and do you want to just, for those who aren't up on that post-traumatic cinema theory, do you want to just give us a little bit on that?
Yeah, so the idea is that there's sort of two modes of post-traumatic cinema, and one of them is sort of the immediate kind of reactive film after a traumatic event, which maybe looks to actually tell the story for the first time of what happened, to kind of get out the news and in some ways force the viewer to partake in that trauma and be part of it and experience it very viscerally. And then the second phase is films that are maybe made with a little bit of distance and time after an event, that maybe take a more storytelling or narrative tack and sort of seek to reflect, I guess, on it. I probably explained that pretty messily, but
no, I think you did a good job. And I think your tagline, this is not another tearjerker Holocaust film, in a way kind of actually alludes to that kind of that second phase. So what you've been talking about you know, this interesting dynamic between the personal and sort of bigger you know, global events, it also in a way leads us nicely to my next question, which is about you had something that's a very common dilemma for a documentary filmmaker, that of working with an incomplete story. In a way, there's lots of gaps in your story. And one of the techniques you used to try and tell this story, for which you were missing all sorts of material, was using both personal and external archive. Can you speak a little bit about this?
Yeah, it was definitely complicated and a bit of a challenge. Um, it was very cool to see a lot of archival materials kind of come out of the woodwork. I have like folders upon folders like on my computer, and actual real folders of press clippings and photos and various things that relatives and yeah, various people in my family have sent me. Because a lot of different people in my family have kind of over different points in time done their own kind of mini investigations into this story and have like accumulated various things, and then no one kind of put them all together. So everyone was very excited to send things through to me. So in some ways I actually had a lot to work with, but definitely was a challenge to compile all of it and to deal with the fact that there is no real objective, like singular story. Even this audio memoir of my great-grandfather's, there are certain things that he focuses on quite a bit that I might not have chosen to focus on. And there are some things that I would love to know more about that he just completely glosses over, and he died before I was born, so I can't get that firsthand account. So it was kind of a kaleidoscopic viewpoint, I guess, which was definitely complicated. But I'm really interested kind of in this idea that the artifact or the archive is not really a tangible thing, but it's more about how we experience it. And that's something I've been researching a lot. So it's kind of cool to feel like I'm contributing to the archive of my family, and also makes it feel like, you know, if we hold this idea of the archive within us, it's not necessarily incomplete in the way that I kind of initially saw it. And it's inherently not going to be objective. And so there's no harm done in not having this elusive objective account. So it's been interesting to consider it that way and kind of helpful. But yeah, it's definitely been an adventure.
Absolutely, yeah. And again, I keep coming back to, because I think it's quite striking in your film, you know, this locating of the personal within, you know, a much bigger story as well. And what you also do in your film is you make a link from past events to current dynamics in the world in terms of privilege, discrimination, and the dynamics of power. Can you speak to this? What were you trying to do, or what were you interested in doing?
Yeah, I definitely wanted to touch on current events, because I think it would have felt negligent not to. There are so many parallels to current global issues in the film that I felt like I had to get into it a bit. But making the film made me very, very aware of the privileges I hold, and how protective and real they are. And also at the same time makes me very aware of how tenuous and how mutable over time different things can be. Like at different points in history, my family would fall in very different places in that scale of like how we're received. And so I was interested to see how my family members felt about that, and to see the ways that like I might differ in my perspective on things, compared to like the generation prior to me, just by virtue of me being that little bit more removed from this particular trauma of the Holocaust, and being more concerned maybe with my present day privilege than with like our ancestral oppression. And I think that is sort of an exemplification, I guess, of how these traumas kind of mutate over time, I guess. But looking at just contemporary parallel issues of like just ethnic subjugation, or like this new fascist alt-right situation happening in a lot of countries, it felt very important to me to touch on how like cyclical these human behaviors are, and the specifics change over time, like who's doing what to whom, although like some things never change. But like on a human rights abuse level or on a policy level, it's the same power dynamic over and over, and like we don't learn. So that felt very interesting to me to touch on, especially at this, like making the film last year, and making it partly in the States during the Trump presidency, and like it all felt very relevant. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think yeah, you talk about the lessons of history and maybe not learning lessons, but I think yeah, I mean, I think it's done very clearly in your film, but also yeah, in
yeah,
a
but then at
very
the same time,
way.
I also kind of wanted to like subvert that kind of trite narrative of like, oh, history repeats itself. Like I didn't want to really do that. I wanted to kind of hopefully show a bit of like nuance in that conversation that I sometimes feel like is missing. So that was what was in my head.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, you know, there's quite poetic aspects to your film. So there's lots of room maybe for sort of richness and interpretation and nuance. I think that does come through very well. And so, Maddy, I know that you're now, you're in your second year of your Master of Documentary Arts, and you're currently working on a longer version of this film. When we spoke earlier, you mentioned when you look back at this current version, this short version of the film, that you see the spaces you want to fill in. I'm interested in what are those spaces?
Yeah, shame I don't want to like knock this film, but it just, by virtue of the time limit, because we were doing 10-minute films, I just didn't have the space to include certain chapters of the story that I initially wanted to. So there's a whole chunk of my great grandfather's journey that didn't even make it in, that I shot for. He had a very dramatic layover being detained in London on his way out of Europe, and I filmed in London around this time last year and have all this footage, and it just, that whole section just couldn't make it in. So I really want to include certain other things that and a couple other things that I just didn't have the space for. And I also really want to include myself, I think, a bit more. I was a little wary of that initially because I felt like it was self-indulgent, but over the course of making the film, I realized that it's actually, I think, very necessary. So I'm gonna include myself as a character more than just a narrator, I guess. Yeah, I want to definitely double down on playing with kind of temporal modes and get a little bit more non-linear and a little more poetic even. And just, I think with more time to play with, with a longer film to play with, I can get more into these kind of fluctuating temporal modes. And I'm especially like thinking about it lately during lockdown, like I feel like time is a very interesting subject to me and feels very strange right now. So I want to play with that a little.
Absolutely. I want to thank you for your time, and I encourage everyone who hasn't seen your film to check out Maddy Bazil's short film, Grandpa Ernest Speaks. And we all look forward to seeing what comes next.
Cool. Thank you, Julia.
Great. Thank you, Maddy.